So yeah, this one is definitely going to put the cat amongst the pigeons, but it does need to be discussed. Good morning and welcome to another beautifully sunny ride on a Sunday morning in Essex. It's just Jimmy and I out this morning because it is the school summer holidays, and as I've mentioned a number of times before, all of our cycling group are family men, so they're either on holiday with families or got other plans with families, but that's absolutely fine. It's always a great fun ride, just me and Jimmy. However, what I wanted to talk to you about today is something that isn't particularly fun and something that is becoming increasingly common on the roads, and it's why car drivers hate cyclists. But before we talk about that, let's get off this main road, because very much to the point of this video, it is quite busy and it's not the easiest thing to film with cars flying by at 50 miles an hour. This is a bit more like it. These quiet, winding country lanes, much nicer than the main 50 mile an hour roads. But before I start with the reasons that I think car drivers hate cyclists these days, I do want to say that I don't want this to get into a huge bout of whataboutism. So I'm going to try and keep my tongue and not give any kind of social commentary as a clapback from cyclists on these reasons that motorists hate cyclists. I'll leave that for you guys in the comments. So the first one is what I like to call the "you're getting in my way" mentality. And that is that drivers see the road as a space for vehicles only. They have this social pecking order in their mind, and cars are always at the top of the food chain for it. So when a cyclist is, in their words, in their way, well, they see that as an affront to their beliefs. And the other point on that is that often cyclists will try to assert some sort of dominance on the road by taking the lane to keep themselves safer, put themselves further out into the road so they're more visible. But rather than safety, drivers see that as arrogance and a case of, well, why are you in my lane? Which is also what fuels the, why aren't you in the bike lane? Why are you on my road? The problem with that is, as all of us cyclists know, that most bike lanes are just a token gesture by central or local government, simply so they can claim that they're promoting active travel, when in reality most of them are just a little bit of paint on a path, and it's a shared use path with pedestrians, which always makes it quite dangerous. And even when that's not the case, they're so poorly maintained that they're littered with potholes or broken glass and other debris, or they've got street furniture right in the middle of them that you need to slalom around. For that reason, it's just much safer, in inverted commas, and more efficient to just use the roads. The second one on the list of why motorists hate cyclists is that they just don't know the rules, because most motorists haven't looked at the highway code since they passed their test. And in fairness, that's true for me as well. And so naturally things change over time. And with the recent change, well, I say recent, about a year ago, where cyclists were given much more priority on the road, motorists are either angry about it or they just don't know. This usually comes to a head when things like, as I mentioned earlier, taking the lane happens. When you come up to a junction, you decide to make yourself a little bit more visible by moving out into the centre of your lane, or more common on the country roads that we ride on, when you're riding two abreast. And that obviously goes back to a safety thing, because as most cyclists will know, riding two abreast is much safer on country roads than riding in single file. Not only that, it actually makes it easier for car drivers to get around you, because if there are 6, 8, 10 of you out on a ride and you're all in single file, that is a very long queue of cyclists to have to get by on a windy road. And the point is that whether you're sat in single file or two abreast, the car will have to breach the centre line and go onto the opposite side of the carriageway to get past you anyway. So it's not as if when you're in single file, they can get past with a car coming in the opposite direction anyway. They still need to wait for the opposite carriageway to be clear. But when you're sat two abreast, you end up being much more compressed and you're a much smaller train to get by, and therefore cars can pass you more quickly. But again, car drivers don't want to hear that argument. The third one is one of my personal favourites, because it's that perennial argument you'll see on many a social media post. Well, why don't you start paying road tax? And as you'll see under that comment, very many cyclists replying, because nobody pays road tax. It was abolished in 1937, I want to say. Whenever it was a good 90 years ago. But even if you get that one across, the argument is then, well, whatever it's called, you don't pay for the upkeep of roads. But the answer to this is twofold. The first one is, no amount of vehicle excise duty directly goes to the upkeep of the roads and fixing potholes and everything like that. The money from car tax, vehicle excise duty, whatever you want to call it, now all just goes into central government coffers, and road maintenance comes out of that massive fund. Vehicle excise duty, again, does not directly go to keeping the roads well maintained. The second answer to, well, you should pay road tax, is that most cyclists are also car drivers. So they do pay vehicle excise duty. In fact, I've got 2 cars in my household and pay 2 lots of vehicle excise duty. So by most motorists' reasoning, does that mean that I've got more right to use the road than them? I'll let you discuss that one in the comments.
I also reckon that my 8-9 kilogram bike with little old me on board does far less damage on the tarmac than a 2 or 3 ton vehicle. We don't hurt the roads.
Yeah, Jimmy makes a very good point, and it's an even more pertinent point since April this year. Let me explain why. Prior to the 1st of April this year, vehicle excise duty was based on the amount of emissions that any car kicked out. So whichever bracket of emissions you fell into, that's how much tax you would pay. And so because of that, electric cars, which create no emissions, didn't pay any vehicle excise duty. However, since the 1st of April this year, they now do. So that argument holds a little less credence these days, because I always used to say that if you're a cyclist, then you don't create any emissions unless you've got a particularly violent bout of flatulence after your morning protein. However, as Jimmy points out, it's now largely based on the amount of damage you do to the road. Our ultralight carbon fibre road bikes, I don't think they do anywhere near as much damage as a 2 or 3 ton metal box. I know I said I was going to keep the clapbacks and social commentary to a minimum. It's very difficult not to fight our corner. Another thing that just keeps the hatred going is the constant media bias that just fuels this them versus us mentality. And newspaper articles will subtly shift the blame onto cyclists, even when they're the victims. A perfect case in point of this is an article that was on the BBC News website just yesterday. The headline for which read, "Driver jailed after young mum killed in e-bike crash." Now you read that headline and a motorist might naturally start thinking, oh, here we go, what's the cyclist done this time to cause an accident that has got someone jailed? But when you read the story, it's an absolutely tragic tale of a young couple on an e-bike who have annoyed the driver simply by overtaking him, it would seem, and the driver ended up going on some anger-fueled rampage and essentially knocking them off the bike, which tragically resulted in the guy riding the bike losing his leg and the young lady on the back tragically killed. So as I say, this constant media bias just fuels that hatred from motorists to cyclists, and they do it fully intentionally because, let's be honest, sensationalism sells, as does a very controversial headline. The next one is that cyclists get away with things, or at least they do in the mind of a motorist. Driving a vehicle is heavily regulated. You need a licence, you need insurance, your speed is regulated, and all 3 of those are things that cyclists don't have to adhere to. And that perceived imbalance creates an intolerance from motorists towards cyclists. And yes, it is true that a lot of cyclists do go through red lights in built-up towns and cities, but then so do a lot of cars. The car driver's argument will be that they have number plates and can be traced. But let's be honest, unless any of their poor driving is caught on some kind of local authority or law enforcement camera, very little is going to be done about it. A lot of people have dash cams these days, but as a general rule, we are not a country of telltales, and most of those dash cams are there purely for self-preservation and protection if you get into an accident. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but it's very rare that you might catch a driver in front of you going through a red light a second or two too late, and you submit that to the police for them to receive a fine. So even though cars are fully traceable, it's not as though they're always held to account for every minor infraction of traffic law. A really important one for me is that motorists often don't see the human. They see the helmet, the glasses, the tight lycra, and they suddenly dehumanise the person in front of them. They don't see the dad on his ride home or the young mum on her commute. And amazingly, there have actually been studies to show this. A couple of years ago, there was a study where motorists were shown a series of pictures of cyclists, all of which had varying levels of safety or cycling gear on. And 30% of respondents considered those who were wearing helmet and high-vis jacket as less human. So therefore, sadly, it's much easier to lose the plot and get angry at someone in front of you when you don't even consider them human. So that's a few reasons why I think cyclists cop so much flack on the road. But the last 2 I find much more interesting and speak to a much more deep and psychological level. Now the first one I think is probably less common, but the last one is definitely a reason that I think cyclists experience so much hatred on the roads. The first one is a projection of guilt and frustration, and by that I mean there's lots of people these days that have a very unhealthy lifestyle, and a lot of them know that they should be doing more to stay fit and healthy. Or it might even be that they used to have an active lifestyle but now don't or can't as much, and so when they're in a car and they see others doing what they really know that they should be doing, they feel guilty and feel frustration about it, and they project that onto others. So sometimes it's not even about the cyclist. Some people are just angry and frustrated with themselves, and they just take it out on you. And in a way I do understand that, because I get angry and frustrated with Jimmy sometimes, because as ever he's ripped my legs off this morning, unintentionally of course, but he is just much fitter and healthier than me. But on that point, I need a breather, and we're nearly at the end of this ride anyway, so let's get home and I'll go through the last, what I think is very important and very credible reason that motorists hate cyclists. Right, let's try and get home without passing out.
That is the essence of it. 2 hours 30 on 30 miles. We need stuff like that.
Complete freedom.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there you go, a lovely 2-hour blast, 30 miles or around about 50k done, and that was absolutely beautiful. We managed to get the whole way around that without getting any close passes or any angry behaviour directed towards us, which is always nice. But as I just said to Jimmy, that was freedom. And that leads me onto my last point, which, as I mentioned earlier, goes to a much deeper and more psychological point. So I think as soon as you hit the age of 17 in this country, most people are desperate to get their driving licence, jump in a car and feel that sense of freedom that a car is supposed to give you. And for the first few months and years, that is definitely the case. And certainly when I passed my test, I love nothing more than getting in my car and going for a long drive with my friends. It really did feel like that complete sense of freedom. And that is the dream that most car drivers are sold. However, after a few years, that dream starts to turn sour when, as I mentioned earlier, you get caught up in non-stop regulation like driving licences, insurance, tax, speed limits, temporary traffic lights at roadworks, normal traffic lights, speed cameras, sitting in traffic jams constantly. The dream very quickly becomes a nightmare. And so when drivers see a cyclist going flying past a line of traffic sat at yet another set of roadworks, that dream that they were promised suddenly feels like a complete illusion, and they feel completely lied to. Car ownership was sold as a dream. Independence, power, status. But these days, it often feels like a burden, and as a car driver myself, I certainly do feel that when I'm out and about in my car. Cyclists then represent everything that that dream should have been. Cheap, active, and independent. And that can hit a nerve for people when they suddenly find that the cyclist is going faster than them in a queue of traffic. Or even if you're just being held up behind them, because cyclists don't just slow you down, they remind you that you bought into the wrong version of freedom. And that, as I say, is exactly what Jimmy and I had this morning. Complete and utter freedom. Although at times it felt like I was trapped on Jimmy's back wheel and just wanted to get off. But that's just Jimmy, unfortunately. He is just an absolute beast on the bike. But otherwise, yeah, they are my reasons or explanations as to why I think cyclists get such a bad rap from motorists. But what do you think? I'm sure a lot of you will leave your comments down below in the comment section, and there might even be a couple of motorists down there leaving a comment or two as well. Please try to keep the comment section a happy and polite place. We all have to share the roads ultimately, as I've said before, and I'm always very courteous on the roads. Always let cars past when it's safe to do so, and always thank a motorist when they either let us through or they hold back for a little while to keep us safe. So yes, keep it polite in the comments, please. But yeah, otherwise, I hope you found this one interesting, if not a little bit controversial. And so I'll say thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Take care, guys.